Hey guys! Today we're going to be learning about the elements of poetry, and we're going to explore how those elements work together within a poem to create certain effects and convey certain feelings. You've probably heard lots of poems before, and you might be able to think of a few. If you've ever heard rhymes like the Itsy Bitsy Spider or Jack and Jill, then you should be familiar with poetry. Oftentimes, nursery rhymes or lullabies are poems that are put to music. Sometimes songs that we know are poems put to music. Poems have a structure that's very different from other forms of writing, and we're going to look at that more today. I want you to think about how a poem looks different from a story in a book. A story has paragraphs and often chapters. A poem has lines and stanzas. Each stanza is a group of lines about one topic or idea in the poem. Now let's take a look at our learning target for today. Our learning target is understanding about verse, rhythm, meter, and other features used in poems. We'll help you write and talk about them. So we're going to look at the elements of poetry, including verse, rhythm, meter, and other features, and we're going to write and talk about those poems. A poem has features you can both see and hear. Each line in a poem is called a verse. Several verses grouped together form stanzas. These are structural elements you see. Other elements in a poem are ones you hear. Meter sets up a pattern of strong and weak syllables in each verse. Rhythm is the regular pattern of sounds in the whole poem, like the beats in music. Rhyme repeats the same ending sounds in different words. And poets use these elements to express their ideas in new and surprising ways. So, in summary, a poem has structural elements that we can see, like verses and stanzas, and elements we can only hear, like rhythm, rhyme, and meter. Paying attention to all of these elements in a poem helps us to understand what the poet is trying to say and how he or she wants the poem to sound and wants the readers to feel. Now we're going to look at a poem called Bigfoot's Complaint by John Hanson. But first, I want you to take a look at the illustration. And I want you to make an inference about what you think the poem is about and what tone or attitude the illustration might suggest about the poem. Now we're going to read the poem Bigfoot's Complaint. Why do they have to call me that? I'm more than just a pair of feet. If humans took a closer look, they'd see my eyes are rather sweet. But I walk these woods and hide my face, my footprints left in mud and snow. The rest of me they'll never see, so I am called by what they know. Now I want you to think and try to find an example of a verse, a stanza, and a rhyme in this poem. Now we're going to fill in our graphic organizer. We're going to be looking for specific elements. We're going to be looking for a description of what that element is and an example of where we found that element in the poem. So first I want you to explain in your own words what each element is: a verse, a stanza, and rhyme. We know from our reading earlier that a verse is one line in a poem. Can you find an example of a verse? When I'm looking for a verse, I'm looking for just one line. So they'd see my eyes are rather sweet. That is an example of a verse in this poem. It is one line. Now let's talk about a stanza. We know that a stanza is a group of verses or a group of lines. Can you find an example of a stanza? I think an example of a stanza would be, "But I walk these woods and hide my face, my footprints left in mud and snow. The rest of me they'll never see, so I am called by what they know." And I'm going to use these 3 dots, also called an ellipsis, to shorten it so I don't have to write the whole thing. So those 3 dots signify that I would start with "but I walk" and end with "what they know." So I'm referring to this entire stanza right here. Now the word rhyme means words that have the same end sound. Now it's important to remember that they don't necessarily have to be spelled the same way. They just have to have the same sound at the end of the word. So try to find an example of rhyme. One example of rhyme that I found was feet and sweet. Notice that the rhyme comes at the end of the verse. Now that we've talked about the elements of poetry and you've seen some examples, I want you to think about these questions. Did you list the same elements, descriptions, and examples that I gave, or did you think of different ones? Which parts of the poem did you see? Which parts did you hear? All of these elements are important in understanding poetry, and we will get more into it in the next lesson.